I became a perfectionist, a people pleaser, a high achiever. It was anything to be able to check off the list to say
Yeah.
I did it right. I was really desperate. I remember just being kind of broken on the floor, crying, really not wanting to live. And he said, "This is not to go back in to save your marriage. This is to go back to save you."
Whenever people find out that I'm a psychiatrist, they're like, tell me what's wrong with me. Like, what's going on?
Yeah, yeah. And that's part of my recovery journey is that my feelings and my emotions are on God. God is God.
No matter where you are, what diagnosis you have, is an image of God. No matter what happens, I know that God has me, and I think that gives me confidence to take more risks. Hi, everybody. This is Dr. Kim from Good News Mental Health Podcast. I am so excited because I'm sure you're like me. We chase after the things that we want, but at the end of that, after we obtain it, we realize that it's not what we needed. And maybe what we needed was we didn't even know that we needed that. And if you're resonating with this, I think you'll really enjoy our guest today because today we're going to be talking about how to really know what you needed to get what you want and how God and how he talks to us is going to get that because let's just be honest, the world is telling us that we need this, we want this. And the Christianese people are saying you need this and you want this, but how do you know your journey and how do you make sure that you're faithful to and fair to yourself? We're going to be talking about how to really know what you needed to get what you want and how God and how he talks to us is going to get that because let's just be honest, the world is telling us that we need this, we want this. And the Christianese people are saying you need this and you want this, but how do you know your journey and how do you make sure that you're faithful to and fair to yourself and also live according to the Bible? And then what does that look like? So I'm so excited. Let me just introduce you our guest real quick. So Mrs. Megan Babcock is a board certified nurse coach, mental health and trauma transformation coach, speaker, and a founder of Is Your Story to Tell. With over 20 years in healthcare as a registered nurse and board certified holistic nurse, she combines the clinical insight with faith based emotional healing to help others overcome trauma, regulate their nervous system, and step into the life they are created for. After walking through her journey of surrender, restoration, and spiritual renewal, Megan now empowers others to find freedom and use their story to create lasting impact. Ms. Megan,
Mhm.
thank you so much for being in Good News Mental Health Podcast.
I am so excited to be here. Thank you for having me. And I'm really excited about this topic.
Yeah, guys, I just want to know the background story. I just got chills reading her bio because I am so pumped about this topic. And we are definitely going to talk about the elements of your story, but I think I know that is for me. I felt stuck what I thought God wanted for my life. Like I thought he wanted me to be a medical missionary, please my parents, be a good person, don't hurt anybody, don't curse, all that stuff, right? Like
Mhm.
jumble of list of do's and don'ts. But now I'm finding in the world, now that I'm a little bit older, especially with hard relationship like marriage or, your elderly parents or your kids, they're like making kind of judgment calls like, oh, that's toxic, that's narcissist, like leave, or like do what's fair for you, like, slay, right? Like there's just a lot of do's and don'ts in the world. And I'm just like, what does God say? Like, and how do you hear that? And Megan, I'm just so excited about this story because I think everybody can resonate with that.
Absolutely. I, grew up in a home that was Christian. I was very involved in my church and I wanted to live the way God intended. I knew the scripture. I knew the 10 commandments. I was like, these are the things that we need to do. And in my journey, I became a perfectionist, a people pleaser, a high achiever. It was anything to be able to check off the list to
Yeah.
say I did it right. Like I really wanted to do it right. But in my story, actually my life, everything was kind of upside down and it was hard in my mid-30s when I came to a point where I had to question everything I
Mm,
knew, and decide what was God speaking to me and what was He asking me to do, because this list of things was leading to so much overwhelm, anxiety. I really was living in fear, and I know the scripture says, like, not to live in fear, but I
mm,
honestly did not know how to do that, and I never really learned how to acknowledge and understand my emotions to be able to say
mm.
what they were. It was just one big jumbled up anxiety is the
Yeah,
best I could describe it.
yeah. Now, I know that this might be a very untraditional way to start a conversation, but I prepped you for this, so you're ready. I want to start with your rock bottom because at that rock bottom, the moment that you question everything, that's when really God spoke to you. So, do you mind sharing kind of what your rock bottom was?
Yeah, so my rock bottom where I absolutely couldn't keep going, because if I'm honest, I had so many rock bottoms that I would just think I need to pull up my bootstraps and keep going, right? And so
Mm,
I had done that for like 20 years. And it was at the point in my mid 30s where I was in my second marriage. And so I was the first person in my family to have a divorce.
mm,
And so that was hard for me. I really didn't want to be different. I didn't want to have that award of being the first to achieve that. That was not on my to-do list. And
yeah.
here I was in this place, seeing that that's the direction of my marriage it was going. My marriage would be classified as a domestic violence marriage with a lot of emotional, physical abuse. And I so badly wanted to save my marriage, and I was so desperate. We had had many times where we had separated and gotten back together, but at this place that I was, it was like, I'm done. I can't keep trying anymore. And I had started doing some of my own work in really deep healing, healing from my sexual past. I had raped in high school, and that played into
Mm,
where I was, but I didn't understand how much it had played in. I was really desperate. I remember just being kind of broken on the floor, crying, really not wanting to live. But I
mhm,
have 3 children I loved and adored. I knew that wasn't the option, but it was like, that's how desperate I was. And so in that moment, I cried out to God and I was just like, I'll do anything. Like, what do you want me to
mm,
do? And that started us on a journey. So at that point, we were separated. I was going forward with a divorce. The domestic abuse had come out. My family was supportive of me leaving that situation. But the advice, the thing that God said to me was to take my thoughts captive. And I was like, really? I'm praying for like a miracle. I'm wanting you to save my marriage. And but again, I was so desperate that I said, okay, I'm going to begin to take my thoughts captive. What do I do with them? And
mhm,
he gave me scripture with about measuring them against the fruits of the spirit. And so I started on that journey, and but was still moving forward with the divorce. And I remember God specifically telling me to go back into my marriage,
mm,
which I was like, really? But as I was doing this work, I knew God was doing a work in me. And He said, this is not to go back in to save your marriage. This is to go back to save you.
mm,
I'm just getting like emotional, really kind of thinking back to that time of like, wow, this is like going back into the fire. And He was showing me that I was going to be refined by the fire. And so I did. I went back into my marriage knowing that God wanted to change me. And so no longer was I looking at this as I was a victim of this circumstance, but what did God want to teach me? And I didn't know if that would save my marriage or if it would just save me or both, right? And
Mm.
so that was a that was in July, and ultimately my marriage did end in the end of that year, about 6 months later. But what I can tell you is what God revealed to me is that all my life I'd been running from the pain. And what he wanted me to do was to look at the pain, try to understand it, and get to what was the deep root that was resulting in me being in the toxic, unhealthy relationships. And I had to stop looking at everyone else because I was the one who was the same in all of these relationships. And so he needed to change me in order for me to have the marriage that I dreamed of.
Mm.
It didn't end up being my second marriage, but I'm happy to say I am in an amazing, healthy marriage 2 years after I started all of this work. And so if you're in that place and you're like, "Oh my gosh, it's so overwhelming. I don't think this can ever change." Actually, it can change, and it can change rapidly when you get to the root, right? So many times we're trying to modify our behavior, check off the list, read the book
Yeah.
to understand what's wrong with me, but we're never really getting to the root. And so, as I began to get curious with God about all of the pains, all of my triggers, He started to just reveal things that I didn't get when I was younger that I really needed. I needed to learn how to understand my emotions. I needed to learn how to express them. I needed to know what were my needs. I didn't even know who I was or what I wanted because everything I was doing was to try to get the approval and acceptance and the love of
Mm.
those around me. And ultimately, he led me back to the event when I was 16. And it was interesting, and it's something that I feel like God is so cool because science, and you know this in your line of
Mhm.
work, like, there's so much that he shows us in the Bible or in our listening and asking questions that are aligned with what we now see and know to be true in neuroscience and how we work through things to have the best mental health and the life that we really dream of. And he allowed me to go back into this memory, not like a PTSD going back and actually like reliving it. When
Mm.
I went back into it, it was from the perspective of looking at it as an outsider, like a reporter, just looking for kind of the facts and kind of what happened and
Mhm.
what was going on in that moment, which really protected me emotionally because I wasn't going back to relive it. I was just going back to get curious about it.
Mm.
And when I did, what I saw was how in that moment I spoke to myself, I will never have a good husband, which I was living out. That's the power of like our words and our beliefs, right? When they become a
Yeah.
core belief, they start writing your story. And that's where it's so important. Like, who is writing your story, you know? And so
Mm.
finding that and recognizing that that was tied to my worth because religion said, like, save yourself for marriage. It was during the time of I Kiss Dating Goodbye and
Yeah.
all of those
The
things that
purity
I
rings. Yeah.
Yes! Yeah, you
Yeah.
remember. We're
Yeah.
about the same age probably. And I had basically counted myself out from
Mm.
then on out. Even though that's what my heart desired, I just even if I desired it, I was like, "Nope, that's not for you. You're not worthy of that." And I kept choosing people who valued me the way I valued myself. And so as I did all of this work over those 6 months and something really hard happened, I knew I was changed and I was different because I was able to stay grounded. I wasn't running from the situation. I was standing in my identity in what God wanted for me and who I was in Him. and having healthy boundaries and saying, "This is not healthy for me. This isn't healthy for him," because, God wants to do a work in all people, even the people who we wanna label as abusers or narcissists and all of that. And what was really interesting and a very pivotal moment for me was when God allowed me to see something different. And I had been praying, God save my marriage, and I was never angry. Like I would never express my real true emotions to God nor to anyone else, right? Because I
Mm.
didn't feel they were appropriate or respectful. But in this moment, I was learning to be honest and be vulnerable. And I was driving home from one of my groups that I was in called Healing from Your Sexual Past. And I was just like mad at God and I kind of let him have it. I'm like, I don't understand. You said in your word, like, if I pray for things and I ask for things that are in line with your will, which marriage is,
Mhm.
from what I read in the Bible, you'll give
Mhm.
it to me. Why? Why aren't you giving me what I'm praying for? And he said to me, I am not an abusive God. Again, what does that mean?
Mhm.
And he said, well, abuse is taking away someone's free will. And I was like, wow, okay. This is allowing me to see God in a new way because I had seen God as judgmental, consequences. Like I didn't obey my parents. I went someplace that I wasn't supposed to. I was sexually assaulted. That was my consequence. So I just
Mm.
needed to live with that, and if I hadn't done that, if I had been obedient, then that probably wouldn't have happened. Well,
Yeah.
that's not how God works. And he was showing me that he's not abusive because I even saw all the way to the start of the Bible. I saw Adam and Eve sinned. First time that we know that they're out, like kick
Mm.
them out of the garden. And I never saw the the love and the kindness of God in that story. And that's how I saw God. And so this was shifting my perspective that he was safe, that he wasn't just sitting up there like judging
Yeah.
and then he convicted me and he said, you may not be doing this in the same way that you're seeing it in someone else through the abuse of physical and emotional violence, but you are trying to manipulate the circumstances. You aren't having boundaries. You're trying to people please. Well, that is trying to get your desired outcome above what they might want. And I
Yeah.
was like, whoa, so what I'm doing isn't healthy, even though I was thinking I'm the one who
Mhm.
it always sacrifices
Yeah.
and I'm doing what God wants. I'm forgiving all the 70 times 7, turn the other cheek. I had a lot of learning to do because I did not truly understand God's heart in those scriptures. And when you take like one little piece of a scripture,
Yeah.
that's dangerous because there's an
Yeah.
entire context. And so he began showing me that. And it started for me to have compassion and to recognize that we're all broken. We're all, whether it's violence or drinking, or for me, it was that perfectionism and cleaning. Like I was doing what I needed to do to survive and avoid feeling the hard feelings. And that was keeping me stuck. It was keeping me from having what I was truly desiring. And so when my marriage ended, and it has continued to be a difficult relationship to navigate, but I'm beginning to see him through God's eyes and also recognizing that I can have my boundaries, but I can still show up and be loving and kind. And so everybody thought I was crazy when I said I was going back. But I know my life would never be what it is today if I had not gone back and uncovered what was actually driving me getting into these situations. And then God showing me how to heal in that place so that I could have the desires of my heart. And
Mm.
that's what I get to live now. And that's what I love helping people to do because it's not easy to do it by yourself because these are really hard things that you're navigating. And most of the time, people faced with these things, they have so much self criticism, judgment, there's no compassion. So it's very hard to access that without support.
Man, I love that. I think something going through my healing my inner child wounds and just hearing you and as a child psychiatrist, because I think a lot of people are entering this episode of like, oh my gosh, like I asked to fix the circumstances, but why do I keep on focusing on the things and the situations and the people? Like, why am I doing that? And there's a concept here that when you weren't shown unconditional love, like when we don't even know what it is, like I just love you for you, then kids start to value themselves as some based on what they produce. So those neuroplasticity that kind of forms to define who you are is I'm praised when I only perform well. I'm praised when I don't get in trouble in class. I'm praised because I made mommy happy. So then kids keep on drawing pictures for mommy because they want that reward of like, oh, they see my worth. But when they act out, when they do tantrum, when they act or say disrespectful things, when it's honest, like vulnerable emotions, then adults say, "Don't say that." Like, what do you mean? Like, and then they're like, okay, like I can't be me. I can't just be me. I need to produce an outcome for my parents. That is a conditional self-worth. And I think just like you said, like when kids start to make these connections, my value is a result of what I make people feel around me. Then it starts that innocent people pleasing. But when you lose yourself at such young age, then there comes a bitterness of I never get to do what I want. Nobody cares about who I am and like what I want to do. So I need to continue to produce things. I had a friend who said this where she was having issues with her husband and I was like, "Oh, why do you want that so much?" or something like that. And she said, and I think you will catch it too, the pattern is like, "I never got to do anything for myself in my whole life. So at least in my home as an adult, I get to choose." And I was like, there's something there where you're really clenching onto something because it just means so much to you for a reason.
Right. And if you don't get to that reason, you will sabotage your life. And, the work that you're talking about, I was so powerful in learning that I can heal without the other person acknowledging, and I can forgive without them asking for an apology.
Yes.
And that act of witnessing my own little child, like that
Mm,
most vulnerable part of me, and recognizing that my needs weren't met in that, and I'm not judging them for it or saying, yes, you can wish it was different, but you can't go back. And
yeah.
so, but what you can do is acknowledge that it was painful and that you didn't have your needs met. And then you can meet that need of that connection and that compassion. I think in psychological terms, that's reparenting, right?
Mhm.
And
Yep.
so what you're talking about, in doing that for your own kids, you can't really do it if you haven't been able to do it for yourself,
Exactly.
And I was not only impacting my own life, but like I said, I had 3 children that I love so much, and I was impacting them. I was
Mm,
traumatizing them. I was
mm,
demonstrating abusive things to them because of my fear and my control and wanting to keep everything perfect and have them show up in a certain way to make me look good and feel good.
mm,
And I remember a moment, and it was all when this was happening, and it was when before I went back into the marriage, and my son was in middle school, and he was crying, and I had to take care of some things, and it was just making me feel so uncomfortable because
mm,
his crying was making me feel that I'm not worthy, I'm not good enough, and my heart was, I wanna be a good mom, I wanna show up. I didn't know how. And I remember
Mm,
saying, if you don't stop crying, I'm going to take your phone away.
mm,
And then I realized I was doing to him what had been done to me that I didn't like.
yes, yes.
And in that moment, you have a choice. You can either go into a shame spiral and not change a thing because you can't really admit it, right? That's what I used to do. I couldn't take feedback and admit when I wasn't showing up the way I desired. And
Yeah.
so you push it away, you push the person away, you dismiss them, you don't validate because I thought validation meant I agree with you, you know? But in
Mm,
this case, my son needed to be validated and I was not in the right. But I didn't have words or know how to even do that. Fast forward to 2023 when my son was 21 and we did a podcast episode together and we talked about hurt people, and healed people. And as I was doing my journey and I was able to show up differently for
mm,
myself, I was able to show up differently for everyone because you
everyone.
cannot give what you haven't yet received for yourself. And so, women who are like feeling discouraged in their marriage or their parenting, it's like if you don't get to the root, like what your friend, get to the root of why, why you're holding on to that so deeply,
Mm,
you won't be able to experience the freedom
yeah.
of. Because now my life is still hard. I've had the hardest 2.5 years. When I stepped out into ministry and doing this work, I thought, okay, I'm being obedient. God, it's going to be so easy and good. That was not it. It's not it. But I am so different. I've learned how to regulate my nervous system. I'm learning how to sit in discomfort. I'm learning how to be able to show up for myself when others disappoint me and
Mm,
not to hold people to my expectation because if I'm honest, like I wanted like a certain relationship with my dad. Like I wanted him to show up in a certain way for me. And I kept like trying and it was disappointing. But what God ended up showing me is you say you want unconditional love, but you're not giving unconditional love. You have a certain way that you want people to show up, and then you're disappointed. Well, you need to be able to love them the way you are asking to be loved. And that brought about so much freedom in my relationships with my parents and like even my relationship with my husband now. I don't hold them to meet my needs. It's my
right.
job. It's going to God and asking Him, how do I navigate this? Letting him speak to me, but we have to take action. Like God doesn't force anything on us. Remember, he's not an abusive God. He's not going to take away our free will, but he will lead you and guide you if you're willing to ask the questions. And then you have to listen and then you have to obey. And most likely, the things that he's asking you to do are not what you wanna do because you've been avoiding, and what he wants is to get to the root with you, and I love this skill that I started to use a lot, and I love the dialectical behavior therapy model and those skills for really being able to navigate these things that dysregulate and when you're doing this work, you're going to be dysregulated and have to learn how to kind of cope in those situations. And those skills are so powerful for navigating those really intense emotions. But those intense emotions are, when you can face them, they're going to be what unlock your freedom and allow your potential to not be stolen. The enemy wants to
Mm,
steal, kill, and destroy, and he's going to use all that God created for good against you. But if you say, no, I'm going to recognize God created my nervous system to help me, but it doesn't always get it right. And so let me see, am I actually in danger right this minute, or do I have time to do something different? Most often, we're not running from a saber-toothed tiger anymore. We have time to choose a different approach. And for me, it was taking opposite action. So when I really didn't want to do the thing that I was being asked to do, like step back into that marriage or so many other things along the way, God asked me to lay my daughter down about a little over 2 years ago to death. And I was like, what kind of God asked that? Well, God laid his son down. Jesus came and died for us. Abraham was willing to lay Isaac down. But what did he want in that? He wanted me to trust him. He wanted me to see that he was a good God. And when I did that, I was taking an opposite action. Instead of doing what I was doing in the past that wasn't working, by the way, I started to do things differently and realized, wow, every time God was revealing something, showing something in me that He wanted to change so that I could have a deeper level of emotional regulation, which leads to freedom. And so life's still hard, but I am more equipped to be able to navigate that hard with appropriate expectations of people, of God, and even of myself.
Like, kind of going back to when you were yelling at your middle school son, right? You said, now you have a choice. And I had that similar moment where I'm saying the things that I said I'll never say to my kids. And it's just the generational habits
Mhm.
flowing through me. And I was like, wait, this needs to stop because I can't be the bearer of passing the baton to the next generation with so many unchecked habits and thoughts and beliefs, and I would enter in that in this theme of stop running, right? Like you can spiral out of shame and like, oh my gosh, I did that. I did the very thing. I know that you and I had the similar moment after the spiral. What do? We love bomb them. We get them extra cell phones, like extra excursions just to make up the bad that we did, right? Like, but then there's that toxic cycle, not validating their feeling, not letting them have their space or opinion or will, but then at the same time feeling guilty about it and love bombing them or dismissing it. This is a really toxic cycle. And I want to kind of go back to what now is so trending. Like everybody's a narcissist. Everybody's toxic. Everybody's, antisocial. But really, as a psychiatrist soapbox, true narcissist is very small percentage. But if people like you and me have done toxic things to our kids because we are living out of our trauma, not everybody is narcissist. They're very well-intended people who's just acting out of their pain, unresolved pain, without the guidance of wisdom and perspective. That I just love your story because God asked you to go back, which was countercultural to church, countercultural to the world. But God wanted to do something special for you and to save yourself from yourself, and I just hope that everybody who's listening to this episode is like, oh my gosh, I do that. I did that. I tend to do that. I'm going to do that again if I don't stop now, right? Like we have these choices and it's like to stop running your mind and say, I need to change. I need to see things differently. Like,
Right.
and I love that in a hard season, you're like, but now the external circumstances is now no longer defining me
Yes.
and who I am, what I'm doing. So outcomes can be horrible, but that does not define my mood, my beliefs about myself, my beliefs on what I do, and the people that who love me and support me don't change.
Yeah. I think it's important to acknowledge 2 things I wanna, and as a psychiatrist, I would love your opinion on it, but mental health disorders, there's a spectrum, right? And if we go back to the beginning of time, narcissism is like putting yourself first at, like, above all else, kind of, if we were
Mhm.
to just make it, and you don't have concern for others, like how it might impact them. Well, I was reading a book on narcissism and I was really convicted as I read it because so much of codependency, people pleasing, perfectionism can fall on that spectrum. Now, I had enough awareness after 20 years to say, wait, that's not who I want to be. So I was able to change it. And sometimes you get so far down the spectrum that you have no awareness and you're not part of the problem. And so you can't change it. Now, if I had continued, I could have continued down that spectrum and been very hurtful and dangerous. I was hurtful and
Mm,
dangerous. And I think sometimes when we start labeling everyone and everything, we are then dismissing our part because we're like, well, that person is this. And so as I read
mhm,
this book, I was like, wait a second, I have a
mm,
lot of these qualities. And that was really like uncomfortable for me to admit because that is not who I wanted to be. But when my wound was writing my story, unfortunately, that is the truth of who I was being. So
yeah,
we have to be careful about how we're looking at others because remember, like, take the plank out of your own eye before you start making these judgments. And that's where I was really stuck. So I do think sometimes when we throw around those things, it's really to dismiss us from our own personal responsibility. And
mhm,
I think we all struggle with this at some level because
mhm.
it was the first sin where they wanted to be something more than they were and they didn't follow the directions. So, love to hear your thoughts on that. And then I'll go to the last part that I wanted to share.
I think, when I was kind of going through my journey of kind of detaching myself from toxic patterns of previous generations, I was watching these like psychologists talking about narcissists, like these are the signs of the narcissist and these are the signs what you can do to like, screw them and like, trap them in their own narcissistic cycle. So I was like reading and watching all these YouTube videos, right? And in the beginning, I empathize with people who label, right? Because labeling gives you a sense of justice because that's what we want is that, hey, people took something from me and I was told to forgive or turn the other cheek. And I don't think it's fair, but I don't have anything to say but call that person this, like this is like the only thing I have. So in a way, I totally empathize with the why we feel like we need to label because you're hurt.
Yes.
But I think to say that I think everybody has a tendency to be narcissist. Add trauma there, add unhealthy parenting there, add, whatever there, coping skills, impulsivity, you add there. It just goes, like you said, further and further down the spectrum. I think everybody has a tendency to be a narcissist. But I think what changed for me when I was like reading this like articles and videos and just like getting that temporary fleeting comfort of labeling somebody. I was like doing this for months, right? And as a psychiatrist, right? I realized I didn't feel happier by labeling that person a narcissist because it didn't change me and my life,
Mhm.
So then I was like, this is probably the extent of secular psychology is maybe bringing clarification or definition or the line in the sand where wrong was done, right? Like what you deserve. I think they defined that really well. But then I was like, I'm still angry. Like every time I watch the video, I'm like, oh, yeah, I remember that. Like I'm just staying angry. And I was like, I don't want to do this. And like you said, I had 2 kids to raise. I can't be in this funk forever and just get angry at my past. Like I have to move forward somehow. So then that's when started to ask God, like, God, like, what do you want me to do? Like, okay, let's say they have narcissistic traits, right? And I probably do too. But like, what do I do with this anger? And I hope that people understand that there's an extent of healing that happens with diagnosis, and being heard and being seen and labeling that that act was not fair to you, definitely. But what do you want to do after? Like,
Yeah. So
who do
powerful.
you want to be? How do you want to treat other people? How do you want to treat yourself? Like, how do you want to be used? What's your purpose? There's so many bigger questions that you
Right.
have the whole life for. So don't get stuck there.
Yes, that's what I think is so important is not getting stuck because if you outsource all of your power and you're waiting for other people to change, you will
Yeah.
never get to have the life that God created you for, one with joy and fulfillment. And that's what I hope people take away from this. And the second part that I wanted to say is that when you start doing this work, people around you change and
Mm,
they get to see you doing something different, and it allows them to question their own part in the story, right? Because for so long when you're just adversaries, and I just think, the enemy wants to keep us in conflict and in battle with each other, right? But we have to remember that we battle not against flesh and blood, right? But
yeah.
principalities. And so, where are you battling? Because if you're going hand to hand combat with somebody in your life, it's unlikely to be very effective. And I spent a lot of time blaming or saying, if this person does this and if they change, but I was like you said, I'm still miserable. Maybe they
Mm,
are wrong. Like I did say, I was in a domestic violence marriage. So you don't stay in unhealthy situations. Like God showed me, like, I value you. I love you. This isn't healthy, but you're not running from something to avoid. You're doing it from a place of a firm foundation in who you are and who God created you to be. And so you're doing it from not a wounded place, but a healed place. And this place is a place where legacy of impact exists because you start breaking that generational cycle in your life, it impacts your kids. They learn new skills. They're more
mm,
effective. And you then can go into your community. We can do podcasts. We can write books. We can talk about this transformational power that was given to all of us. And God says that we are renewed by the transforming of our mind. That means
mm,
that's why he said, take your thoughts captive, measure your thoughts, because those are the things that are writing your story. And so just getting curious about your thoughts, and before you even are aware of your thoughts, at least for me, if someone's like, where do I even start? It's like, what is activating your body? Where are you getting triggered and you're feeling it? That's a good sign to start getting curious about what are you thinking, because most likely you feel like you don't have an option and you're trapped, and so you want to run when really taking the opposite action of getting curious and trying to understand. And I love just when we ask ourselves like 5 questions, why or what questions, why am I feeling this way?
mm.
That person did this. Well, why does that make you feel that way? What can you do differently? When you start really getting to the root versus, I don't like that I'm angry. I'm not going to be angry. I'm going to shove
Mm,
that emotion. Because God
mhm.
created us with emotions and he created us with a nervous system to alert us to things. So we want to work with it and not against it.
I love that. And I think this whole journey, there's when you were sharing how God talks to you, there's so many moments where he just gave me a curious insight, insightful questions, right? It was like, why do you think that way? It's like, well, where did that start? It's very gentle and very inquisitive voice. So when you feel like, oh, God doesn't want me to do this, da, 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 that's not how he sounds like. And I hope that people can say, that's like this culture, this church says God talks to you like that, and secular said God talks like no. God is very gentle but very inquisitive. He nudges you. And I'll just kind of give an example because we talk about gender roles. So for a lot of time, this little insecure little Eugene, I thought husband's supposed to be a provider and protector in all aspects. So it's like if in-law is saying something, then I wanted him to be the knight in the shining armor and just like stab them, with words and just like protect them because that's my expectation. But if you meet my husband, he's so chill and laid back. I'm more of a fighter, then he's more chill and like, let's gather some opinions, like, let's see what's going on. So he wasn't meeting my expectations of what I thought godly husband was supposed to be. And I was bitter for so long because you're like, you don't love me, you're not taking care of me, like you're not coming to rescue me when there's an argument. God told me, you can still say things for yourself.
So
Like you
good.
don't want he doesn't have to be the mouthpiece for you. And The little piece that was kind of off was my mom never said this like blatantly,
Mhm.
like subliminally. She thought women are supposed to be quiet, soft spoken, like kind of behind the scene, godly women. And she expected her husband to kind of come in and forth. So that kind of expectation really trickled down to me. And I was expecting something that was not natural for my husband, number one. And number two, he was going through his own issues of overcoming his belief system that he adopted as a child too, right? So it really was a journey of why are you expecting something from a person that they cannot give you? I was like, why don't they say sorry? Why don't they see this? Why don't they say that? And he's like, they can't do that for you, you know?
Right.
So it's like checking the expectations of others and also yourself. It's like, why do you expect yourself to be perfect when you're not? And spend the whole life trying to prove that you're perfect.
Yeah, so good. This has been such a good conversation. I love it.
Yeah. I just hope that listeners hearing our heart, and the pain, and I hope that this woke up some people being like, "Oh my gosh, I did that. I'm going there. I did say that to my kids. I did expect that from my husband, and I want to change." And I know, Megan, you and I both have a course on this. So can you just introduce us a little bit about your course and coaching product so that if they need your insight on this, how can they reach you?
So the best place to find everything is on itsyourstorytotell.com. And I have different offerings, but I have a whole free resource section. So if you are looking to get started, there's something there for you. It's Your Story to Tell is a nonprofit. So we want to make this accessible because I know that a lot of times when you find yourself in these really hard places, you can't get into a counselor, you can't, you don't have the money to have a coach and things like that. And so my heart really is that we provide these resources for as many people. So check that out and see if you qualify. You can get a scholarship or if you want to give to It's Your Story to Tell. I also have a podcast that you can listen to and a blog every week. And recently I wrote a book called Unstuck. And it's about creating a life that you love. And it takes you through a process of, well, I feel stuck. So, how do I go from there to what I've been dreaming of? And so,
Mm,
it's a great way it's like having a coach in a book to help you kind of process some of those things. And all of that can be accessed on my website.
yeah. Well, Miss Megan, thank you so much for being here. It was such a blessing to hear your story and how God is really leading you to the narrow and not listening to the world and not listening to the religion, but really walking out your journey. And it's been such a blessing to have a conversation with you and give me an opportunity to share part of my life as well. Yeah, for everybody who's listening, check out her website. I'll link it down in the description below. And I'm just so excited that we're all listeners and all that we're walking out in our journey that's unique calling of healing for us. So thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
It's a